My name is Jane Gordon. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs here, and we are at the venerable institution that has been here since 1791, always pursuing an interest in history and the evidence, particularly in the form of manuscripts that really help us to understand that American history. And one of the things that has always been really key to us is the whole investigative process. The work that goes into tracking down the history and interpreting the history. And we've done it through programs, we've done it through publications. Certainly the base of that is the preservation of those documents so that the programs and publications can take place. And now we're going to be looking at tracking down history in a different way through a very interesting voyage and about a voyage, and through interesting set of, I don't know whether we call them documentaries or what, but Andy will explain that in a few minutes, a hit and run history. We are filming this so that the material will be available to viewers in a much larger area. So I'd ask you just to turn off your cell phones if you would. And just before Andy gets started, just remind you that we have programs going on, a plethora of programs every week. We have calendars out there at the table, and would just remind you that most of these are free, open to everybody, and we'd love to have you back for some of you who are newcomers and all of you who are recidivists. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Buckley, who will explain this entire project and what's going on and what will go on.
Great. Thank you. I do want to say that since this will be broadcast on the PBS Forum Network, that if you do not want to be remembered for posterity, please let us know. But otherwise, we're going to take it that you are consenting to having your image recorded for evermore. Anyway, it's an honor to be invited to be here at the Mass Historical Society. We've been on a journey, and it always brings us back here. To myself and my crew, the story of the Columbia expedition is inexorably set into the beams of this place. Whenever we've come here to film, it kind of feels like going to a shrine and not just a research library. After all, many of the backers of the Columbia expedition not only donated their relics from the first American voyage around the world to the Massachusetts Historical Society's original founding collections, but they were some of the founders of the institution itself. I first came here in the autumn of 1995. During the previous summer, I had decided at last to write that book, the book that everybody said I should be writing. I just didn't know what it was going to be about. I knew it was going to be about history and have some element of mystery to it, which are my two loves. Something in the past was going to happen suspenseful. I just didn't know where or when, and all I knew is when people asked is that someone was going to get murdered. But sense of place is also important to me. And I knew that I was going to be visiting friends out in Vancouver during this time that I had set aside for writing. And I knew that my topic was going to have to connect New England and the Pacific Northwest. So when I started research after Labor Day, it didn't take me long to find a topic, the Nor'westmen. These were the sailors, mostly out of Boston, who launched America into the global economy. From New England down around South America to trade cheap manufactured goods for sea otter furs on the northwest coast, then to China to trade for tea, porcelain, and silks, and then returning home with a fortune. While there were plenty of thrilling tales of round-the-world exploits for me to find, it was the first captain that caught my eye, John Kendrick of Cape Cod. He was the commander of the Columbia expedition, and he was also, I found later, a distant relative of mine. Kendrick was said to have never returned from the voyage after 7 years, and was killed in Honolulu Harbor when a rival English trader fired a salute, which included live ammunition, by accident. So there I had it, a story to connect New England and the Pacific Northwest, and a possible murder. So the facts of the case, if you will, were here at the Mass Historical Society. Here was the log of Columbia's third officer, Robert Haswell, the only first-hand account of the voyage. Here were the records of Joseph Burrell, the senior partner in the syndicate that financed the voyage. Here were numerous accounts by contemporaries on other vessels. Even after my novel, The Bostoner, was published in late 1999, I continued following the story of the Columbia, and my research has taken me to rainforests on the far side of Vancouver Island, and to the Pearl River in China, to the archives of the East India Company, and a shipwreck in the Philippines. But inevitably, I always found something out there that brought me back here. In 2008, I began looking to find a way to effectively bring the story to a wider public. While my own book and others may have found a receptive audience, the story still hadn't been able to stick in the greater public consciousness. With the advent of online video sites like YouTube, there seemed to be an answer. Anyone, anywhere could tell their story and share it with the world. And I thought perhaps embedding a series of short videos on a website might be an effective tool to cultivate a broader interest and then lead to perhaps another nonfiction book proposal. Having bought a state-of-the-art MacBook Pro, I signed up for some classes on digital filmmaking at the Apple Store, just a few blocks down the street from here. And when I told the story of what I was working on to one of the resident filmmaking experts there, she looked at me and she said, you know this story better than anybody else, and you tell it very well, so forget about doing a website or something like that. If you want to make a movie, make a movie. That was still intimidating, though, because I'm a writer. I'm not a filmmaker. But then I did a search on YouTube for the name John Kendrick. And it turned up a few results that hadn't been there a few weeks before. Fourth graders from the Ewing Young Elementary School in Newberg, Oregon, had posted a series of videos as part of a historical project on Pacific Northwest Coast explorers. They were simple, but they delivered the information, and more importantly, they were there. Where was I? Where were any proper historians putting any stories up of this on YouTube? We were being shown up by a bunch of 10-year-olds. And so, who was next? Was it going to be Hollywood? And so I realized the story couldn't wait. So gathering a crew and borrowing some equipment from our local public access station, we set to work on producing a pilot. We didn't have a budget to go around the world following the Columbia, but we could do a prelude to the departure. We could give background on the scheme behind it and the people involved, tell it locally in New England by visiting historians in the places where the officers and crew grew up, and bring the audience along with us. As we continued along, the idea became not to tell the story of the Columbia as a 9-hour, multi-night, Ken Burns-style documentary. Instead, as a tale that travels around the world, each location could be its own 45-minute episode, which is really what you have in an hour-long program on commercial television. At a full season of 13 episodes, that would work out to 9 hours, the same length as a traditional documentary. But the pacing and style would have to be very different. And for that, we looked to the Travel Channel's No Reservations. We would do for history what Anthony Bourdain has done for cooking, making an adventure. Besides, we had no real budget to speak of, so we had to try a rough run-and-gun approach. But we also wanted to show our viewers how we learned the documentary filmmaking process. The crew itself would become part of the story. This would not be something that you'd find on PBS, for sure. So we spoke with Professor Mary Malloy of the Sea Education Association in Woods Hole, who is really the foremost authority on the Northwest Coast fur trade. But we also spoke with local historians. Alan McLennan from Pleasant Bay on Cape Cod, where Kendrick grew up and learned the water. Nancy Cole at the Martha's Vineyard Historical Society in Edgartown, where Kendrick started his family and became a whaler. Ben Dunham and Thornton Gibbs of Wareham, where Kendrick's house, bought from the booty of privateering, still stands as a museum. And Don Ritz of Hull, which is the boyhood home of logkeeper Robert Haswell. And of course, the home of that logbook which is right around the corner here right now, the Massachusetts Historical Society. So having been awarded 3 Massachusetts Cultural Council grants, we screened our pilot throughout Massachusetts. The audience response was very gratifying. Despite departing from convention, and despite a lack of experience, money, and equipment, we found time and time again that screenings, people were, whether they were history buffs or hated the topic, they really liked our story. And they loved watching us work. And this was quite a revelation. In a time when reality television is omnipresent, viewers most enjoyed watching us encounter history. Time and time again, people said they felt like they were on the adventure with us. Our style, they said, made it all seem so accessible. So as screenings for our pilot wrapped up in the summer of 2009, we felt yet again we couldn't wait. We needed to move on a second episode. With our previous grant money and 10 more grants from local cultural councils and revenue from screenings, we set out to fulfill the promise of our pilot. Imagine what we could do if we were set loose on the world. With every installment, we've faced challenges, but managed to overcome them by finding a new way to tell our story, a new way to create a sense of place. So you'll see in this second chapter, when we headed to Cape Verde, the newsworthiness of our visit gave us at one point, an edge of journalism. Right now here with about 300% humidity.
No wind.
No
wind.
Not a puff of wind. And not only hazy and overcast, but the smell of bleach and alcohol is permeating the air. There are just tons of family members just ringing the hospital right now, worried about loved ones. It's a very concerned populace right now here. Because of this, of all the support, the hospital just doesn't have any supplies anymore. Yeah, this is what it is. This is it. Yeah. Tylenol is in there. Cotton balls. I mean, just the most basic stuff. The sort of stuff that you have in your medicine cabinet, really, just writ large. I mean, this is the basics of first aid, and that's what they were in need of greatly. There we go. We also got a big thing of vitamin C. I mean, this is Mom's medicine cabinet. This is not tricky stuff. 100 years back in medical technology, alcohol and bleach. There's no high-tech biologic drugs being used here. It's just breast and fluids and
the bare bones of medicine.
Keep it clean. And so they've had 100 cases in the past 2 days. This is the line for the emergency room, right here.
It's just so sad to see. When I worked at CVS in Harwich, we just had boxes of these simple supplies just sitting in the back room. Who knows when it'd see, shelf space in Harwich. And, what else to do with it? Send it back to Woonsocket? Do they really need it there?
Bon, então,
Yeah.
hora de vai
Doutor Wesley só fica no amanhã, depois no vídeo, pelo menos.
hora de vai no mundo, isso
Thing is that we haven't gone to the Falkland Islands yet to be able to continue this voyage. At the South Shore Natural Science Center, we did a screening of this chapter, and there was a producer for WGBH Online, and she asked us during the question and answer session if we'd be willing to do a web series, and my first reaction was no. I don't want to cut this up into tiny little pieces, and because this stands as a whole, I feel. And also because, really, I didn't want to be giving it away free online. However, on our way up to one of our last screenings at the West End Community Center, I raised the idea of a web series as a series of biographies, separate from what we already have. It would kind of feature the supporting cast of Columbia. So she asked that I draft a proposal, and I did so during the screening, and I got it off to her, and they liked the idea, and we began production in June. And where was our first stop? It was right here in this building, of course. So, however, we needed something to draw all of these biographies together. This was a motley collection of privateers, refugees, and POWs, and slavers. We needed some sort of touchstone, and the answer lay in the Columbia and Washington medal. That's the rarest of all American medals, and the Mass Historical Society has the only complete set. So as we continued down the list of names that are emblazoned on this medal, we felt we needed to also talk about some of the officers besides just John Kendrick and Robert Haswell. So following our episode on one of the owners, Samuel Brown, who's from Newport, we thought it was time to tackle a man who is pretty much the most famous person to come out of the Columbia story, and that was Captain Robert Gray. This is the short that we did on him. Oh, Robert Gray.
Yar.
Robert Gray was the captain of the Lady Washington, which was the concert vessel, a small sloop that was to accompany the Columbia. After leaving off with Samuel Brown in Newport, we headed up the road to Tiverton, Rhode Island. Tiverton's the place where the refugees from the British occupation in Newport would have headed, including Samuel Brown on his way to Boston. It's kind of curious that at the same time, Robert Gray, who was 21 at the time, also left his hometown of Tiverton and headed to Boston. Both men settled in the North End, so we headed to the Boston Public Library to see if we could find any record of Robert Gray's Revolutionary War service. We headed to the research library and then on to the microfilm room, where we came up with precious little. Supposedly Robert Gray was in the Continental Navy, but we couldn't find any records of that. So we headed up to Alstead, New Hampshire, to talk to somebody who might have some information on the background of Captain Robert Gray.
I'm 7 generations descended from Robert Gray.
Okay.
And so my father's name is Robert Gray Twombly. And I'm William Robert Twombly, so that Robert keeps showing up. And it's been part of our kind of family history. You know, first American sea captain to sail around the world. And I think even in the larger family there might even be a sea chest and some other historical items that have transcended time and are still within the family.
Do you know anything about his background, you know, having grown up in Tiverton, Rhode Island, or any service that he had before he started on this, historic voyage?
some assumptions that he would have been involved in the Merchant Marines or in privateering, and there's some assumptions that he would have been involved in the Revolutionary War in some capacity.
We have looked for a lot of information on his background, and it's kind of murky.
Just as we don't have his journal, if there was a journal from Robert Gray, we're missing some details of his life that preceded and also after the voyages of the Columbia and Lady Washington. So it is a little bit ambiguous.
It was a private trading venture, and so all those records were private.
You know, the stories that we know are the stories that have been written, and you know, we obviously as European descendants come from a written history, and we don't pass stories down particularly well orally, and so what's not written 7 generations after the fact, it's hard to know exactly what was going on.
Another Gray family member, William N. Twombly, offered to take some documents out of a secure location and make them available to us at his home.
So you're a direct descendant of Robert Gray, then?
I am.
What was it like growing up with this story?
My parents didn't really just talk about Robert Gray very much, so I think I was older, much older, when I began to realize the significance of what he had done.
What's inside this box here?
Well, when I was a child, this box was always in our cellar at home, and I never knew what was in it. But finally I got so curious that I took a screwdriver and I broke open the lock, and I opened up the box, and inside were only papers. So I was very disappointed because I was hoping for something far more interesting.
A treasure.
A treasure. It wasn't until many years later that we actually looked at the papers. These are original papers from Robert Gray's. Many of them are from his voyages.
The account book of the sloop Washington commencing October 6th, 1787 at sea. So that would have been a week after they left. That is definitely something that we would want to see. I've never seen that before.
Well, we have bills of lading and account records. We have lots of receipts. We have inventories of the ship. We have letters from and to the owners. We have the list of owners.
I'm finding a letter right here dated January 27th. Yeah, Boston, January 22nd, 1787, which is great. This is exactly what I was looking for all along. Boston, 2nd March 1787, to Robert Gray. Sir, you having the command of the ship Pacific, on orders to you are proceed from hence to Charleston, South Carolina, with a possible dispatch on your arrival there. We are wishing for the success of your voyage, your friends and owners, Samuel Brown and Crowell Hatch.
Oh.
They were 2 of the owners that I just talked about who were slave traders. He's going to bring the ship Pacific to South Carolina. I had heard about this, but I couldn't find the source of it, and I didn't know where it was. All he was delivering the ship and cargo and follow instructions from there.
So this letter was the first evidence that we found linking Robert Gray to Samuel Brown and Crowell Hatch prior to the voyages of the Columbia and Lady Washington. Then we were really surprised to find a connection to another very familiar name.
Kendrick? Charleston, May 16, 1787, telling him to take Codman's 17 bolts of Russia duck in the hands of Mr. Gardner, which I wish you to put on board Kendrick, taking his bill of lading to be delivered to my brother John Codman in Boston.
This is 1787.
Men began to work for the ship Columbia. August 2nd, 1787. Of receipts for the Columbia: chocolate, sugar, rum, sugar, chocolate, rum,
sugar chocolate, rum, sugar chocolate. In August, the ship Columbia is being provisioned to Codman Wharf. In September, Robert Gray is bringing the Lady Washington into Castle Roads in Boston Harbor. A few weeks later, they would leave on the round-the-world voyage. The facts that we've known so far are simply that Robert Gray was born on May 10th, 1755, in the town of Tiverton. What's it like holding on to these precious documents?
So I learned a lot today from you, and I'm glad that they were helpful to you.
8:15. Started off the day in New Hampshire, speaking with one member of the Gray family and looking for any information at all that we could find about Robert Gray. By the end of the day, we actually found it. Documents as to what Robert Gray was doing before the Columbia left. Working for Crowell, Hatch, and Samuel Brown. Possibly having deals with John Kendrick. All these people involved in the Columbia expedition. We've got one more person to cover. Second officer of the Columbia, Joseph Ingraham. And our story starts off here in Boston.
They're gonna get to you to find out what they need to. They're gonna get to you and they'll use others to do so. They'll get it out of you by hook or by crook. They will. They will.
So I'm going to be very careful doing this now. I dare not touch it. But, and that's a great thing to be able to have here as a special addition to all the other exhibits that are out there. So I thank the Twombly family for that. This was great because it gave us an opportunity to do 10 different shorts that were the centerpiece of the history page on WGBH. It allowed us 10 different opportunities to tell stories in a short fashion and to do it in a very quick fashion. And the great thing is that we've been hearing from educators that they feel like this is the sort of thing that it would make a great teaching tool. And that's not what we set out to do. We simply set out to not be the last word on the story of the Columbia expedition, but more like the first word, just to kind of get interest going. But when teachers come to us and say, I've got teenage boys who are not paying attention in history class, but they love this, that's really gratifying to hear. And being able to use also local bands, of which we've used 4 so far that are based in the New England area, to be able to pace it in such a quick sort of way, it's great, but at the same time, we don't really dumb it down. And we do make some discoveries, and that's been very gratifying. As we're going forward, we've actually set our sights on going to the Falkland Islands, Cape Horn, and Robinson Crusoe Island for our 3rd full installment. That's the most logistically challenging. Certainly, just to be able to get down there, there are only flights to the Falklands once a week, for example, and never mind the cost of it as well. But we've been able to develop some great partnerships, including Crucero Australis, which is a cruise line which leaves Patagonia and goes around Cape Horn. And it looks like this fall, they're going to be taking us on that cruise. Now, we're still looking to be able to get down there, since we can't walk, or drive easily. So we've actually started a campaign using the online tool, fundraising tool Kickstarter, to be able to raise that certain amount of money and to be able to just pay for the cost of bringing a crew of 5 down there, including Mr. Kane Stanton over here, who did such a wonderful job talking and reading the log of Robert Haswell, and certainly Jay Sheehan, who's been our production manager and didn't get to go to Cape Verde last time either. So, and also Jamie Gallant, new addition to the crew. So, and we're going to be seeing who else might be able to bring along. But that's what we found as an optimal number is 5. So anyway, I'll make the pitch right now. If you go to hitandrunhistory.com, that'll bring you right to our Kickstarter page, and you can see what what we're trying to do there. And we certainly want to thank Chrysaris Australis for making some cabins available to us and just be able to cruise those same waters that Columbia did. And then we're going to be off to the northwest coast and follow it along to Hawaii, China and Japan, and the Philippines. So that's what we're looking to do, but again, WGBH gave us a great opportunity to be able to present our story. Beyond that, I think I'm out of words, so I'm more than happy to answer some questions, if anyone has them. And as I said, we're going to, since this is going to be filmed, we're going to try to get you on camera so we can hear your question as well, and that'll go up on the PBS forum. Yes, ma'am.
I'm the Director of Collection Services here at the Historical Society, and I'm curious what happened to the papers.
Oh, well, they are, I believe they're still with the family. I'm guessing they're not in that box right now.
No. We'll talk.
Sure. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
What role did the privateers play in the Revolution?
Well, you know, that's one of the things that we covered in one of our other shorts focusing on John Derby, one of the earlier ones. We actually went up to Salem and spoke with Emily Murphy, who is at the Salem National Maritime Historic Site, and since a number of the owners were privateers as well, or they were privateers and slavers and whatever, we focused mostly on John Derby, and she was able to give us a wonderful account of what she feels privateers were. And Emily's great because she gave us, she's very adamant that privateers are not pirates. And the wonderful thing is in our first episode, we have Thornton Gibbs saying the government gave them a license to be a pirate. So we've got this wonderful debate going on in our work. But the privateers, certainly it was some people think that it was a big motivation for all these guys who'd been kept down for so long and had to be smuggling under the British mercantile system to be able to go out finally and get theirs and get somebody else's as well, and it was just highly lucrative, both between privateering and slaving. As Josh Smith had said to us, these are people who are used to going into harm's way and dealing in very difficult situations, and they're armed. And so when you have people who are already prepared for that, and you've got a whole harbor full of ships and men who are used to privateering and slaving, it doesn't seem like such a big deal to go off to the other side of the world to where no one's been before, and to be able to make some money and come back again 3 years on such a dangerous voyage. Because really, if they didn't do that, the British mercantile system was closing them out of their regular ports. So they were taking that risk, but they were desperate because they had men and material, and they weren't going to just sit around forever. So, yes?
Where is the sword now?
Which one?
The one that was being
that is a creation of Rusty Griffin of Chatham, and I believe it's hanging over his mantle. God love him. So he made it. He owns it. So, anyone else? Well, great.
All right.
Jane?
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to mention just a couple of things. Other familiar faces that you see in the audience. Peter Drummy, the person who was actually showing you the Hasbro journal, and Ann Bentley unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. We do have the Hasbro log, the ship's log, right outside here in the exhibition case, as well as the Columbia medal. Anything else, Peter, that you want to make sure people know about?
A replica of, on the other side, beyond the cannon, there's a replica of the Columbia to give you. When you say 85 feet, I think sometimes it's hard to imagine just how small these ships were.
That's right. And the Lady Washington was only 60 feet.
Exactly.
One mast. Imagine going anywhere in something like that.
We will eagerly follow your next parts of your voyage. You left us literally hanging. So.
Well, that's exactly what we wanted to do.
That's exactly the point, right?
Great.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great history.
All right.
All right.